Last Tuesday, a 72-year-old woman sat across from me in my office. Her hands were shaking. Not from illness. From shame. She had just told her 43-year-old son that she couldn't lend him another $8,000. And he responded by telling her she was a terrible mother. That after everything he'd been through, the least she could do was help. That if she really loved him, she wouldn't even hesitate. She looked at me and asked the question I've heard more times than I can count. Am I a bad parent for saying no? Let me be very clear with you right now. No. You are not a bad parent. You are a tired parent. A drained parent. A parent who has been giving for so long that you've forgotten you have the right to stop. For over 40 years, I've worked with families navigating this exact struggle. Parents in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, who are being emotionally and financially squeezed by their own adult children. And the pattern is always the same. The guilt. The obligation. The quiet devastation of watching your retirement savings, your health, and your peace of mind disappear. One favor at a time. Today I want to talk about 5 things you do not owe your adult children, no matter how much they demand them. No matter how loud the guilt gets. No matter what anyone else tells you. If you're over 60 and you've ever felt like a hostage to your own family, this video is for you. Stay with me. Before we get into the list, I want to explain why this conversation is more urgent than ever. Your generation was raised on a very specific belief, that good parents sacrifice everything. You watched your own parents work themselves to the bone. You internalize the idea that loving your children means never putting yourself first. And for decades, that belief served you well. You raised your kids. You provided. You showed up. But here's what nobody told you. There was supposed to be an expiration date on that level of sacrifice. At some point, your children were supposed to grow up, become independent, and start carrying their own weight. For many of you, that happened. But for a surprising and growing number of families, it didn't. We're now living in an era of what I call extended parenting. Adult children in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, who still expect mom and dad to solve their problems, fund their lifestyles, manage their emotions, and be available on demand. And if you dare to push back, you're met with guilt trips, accusations, and emotional punishment. I need you to hear this clearly. Setting a boundary is not the same as abandoning your child. Setting a boundary is the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, you're not helping your child. You're teaching them that the world will always bend to their demands. And that lesson will hurt them far more than your no ever will. Now, let's talk about the 5 things you don't owe them. Number 1. You don't owe them unlimited financial support. I once worked with a couple, both retired, both in their early 70s. They had saved carefully for decades. Good pensions. Modest investments. Enough to live comfortably through their remaining years. Then their son lost his job. They helped with rent for a few months. Reasonable. Then the few months became a year. Then there was a car payment. Then credit card debt, then a down payment on an apartment. In 3 years, they had drained over $140,000 from their retirement. And their son? He still hadn't found stable employment. Not because there were no jobs, because he had never been forced to figure it out. This is what I call the financial guilt trap. And it works like this. Your adult child presents a crisis. You feel the pull of parental duty. You give. The crisis passes, temporarily. But because the underlying pattern hasn't changed, a new crisis appears. And the cycle repeats. Over and over. Until you have nothing left. Here is the truth. You are not a bank. You are not a safety net that exists in perpetuity. Your retirement money is not a family fund that your children are entitled to access. Now, does this mean you should never help? Of course not. There are genuine emergencies. A medical crisis. A natural disaster. A one-time catastrophic event that anyone would need help with. That's different. What I'm talking about is chronic financial dependency. The kind where your help becomes their plan, where your sacrifice becomes their expectation. The healthy boundary sounds like this. I love you. I want to see you succeed, but I am not in a position to continue funding your life. I believe in your ability to figure this out. That sentence will feel brutal the first time you say it, but it might be the greatest gift you ever give your child. And it might save your future. Number 2, you don't owe them an explanation for every decision you make. A 68-year-old woman told me she wanted to sell her house. It was too big for her now. The upkeep was exhausting. She found a beautiful condo near the coast. For the first time in years, she felt excited about something. Then she told her children, and the reaction was immediate. You can't sell the house. That's where we grew up. What about Thanksgiving? Where will we all stay? This is selfish, Mom. You're not thinking about the family. So she didn't sell. She stayed in a 5-bedroom house she could barely maintain. And the excitement she felt? Gone. Replaced by the familiar weight of obligation. This happens more than you would believe. Adult children who feel entitled to a vote or a veto on your life decisions. Where you live, how you spend your money, whether you travel, who you date after a spouse passes, what you do with your estate. Let me be direct. You do not owe your adult children an explanation for how you choose to live your life. You don't need their approval to sell your house. You don't need their permission to go on vacation. You don't need their blessing to find love again. You are not a child. You are their parent. And you are a fully autonomous adult who has earned the right to make your own choices. Now, there's an important distinction here. Sharing is not the same as asking permission. You can tell your children about your plans because you want them to know. That's generous. That's open. But the moment it turns into a negotiation, the moment they believe they get to approve or reject your decisions, that's a boundary being crossed. The healthy boundary sounds like this. I appreciate your concern. I've thought about this carefully. I'm moving forward with my decision. Not defensive. Not apologetic. Just clear. Number 3, you don't owe them free, on-demand babysitting. Let me say something that might surprise you. I love grandparents. And most of you love being grandparents. There is a special kind of joy in that relationship, a lightness that parenting itself doesn't always have. You get the best parts. But that joy disappears very quickly when it becomes an obligation. I've spoken with so many grandparents who started out happily watching the grandkids one afternoon a week. Then it became 2 days, then 3, then every school holiday, then every sick day, then every time their adult child wanted a break, which turned out to be every weekend. And at some point the grandparent stops being a grandparent and becomes an unpaid, unappreciated child care worker. Here is what I want you to understand. Your adult children chose to have children. That decision came with responsibilities, including the responsibility to arrange and pay for child care. That is not your job. It was never your job. And beyond the emotional toll, there is a very real physical toll. You are not 30 anymore. Chasing toddlers, managing school schedules, handling tantrums, these things are exhausting for a 25-year-old. For someone over 60, especially someone with health challenges, it can be genuinely dangerous. I've seen grandparents ignore their own doctor's appointments, skip their own medications, and push through pain, all because they felt they couldn't say no. The healthy boundary sounds like this. I love spending time with my grandchildren. I'm happy to help when it works for me, but I need you to respect that I have my own life and my own limitations. And here's the part that matters. When you babysit because you want to, not because you have to, the time with your grandchildren actually becomes joyful again. Boundaries don't destroy the relationship. They protect it. Number 4, you don't owe them access to your peace. This one is subtle. And for many of you, it might be the most damaging pattern of all. A 65-year-old man came to see me because he couldn't sleep. He'd been an insomniac for about 2 years. When I dug into his life, the cause wasn't work. It wasn't health. It was his daughter. She called him almost every night. Sometimes at 10. Sometimes at midnight. Always in a crisis. A fight with her husband. A problem at work. A friend who betrayed her. An existential meltdown about her life choices. And every single time, he picked up the phone. He listened. He comforted. He gave advice, which she rarely followed. Then the next night, a new crisis. A new call. The same cycle. His blood pressure was through the roof. He had lost 15 pounds. He told me, "I feel like I'm living her life instead of mine." This is what psychologists call emotional dumping. It's when someone consistently offloads their emotional distress onto you without any regard for your capacity to hold it. And when your adult child does this, it's particularly insidious because you feel like it's your duty to absorb it. You're their parent. If you don't listen, who will? But here's the reality. You are not your child's therapist. You were never trained to be. And even if you were, a therapist has sessions that end. They have boundaries. They don't take calls at midnight. The constant emotional weight your child places on you is not love. It's dependency. And it is slowly eroding your health, your sleep, your joy, and your ability to enjoy the years you have left. The healthy boundary sounds like this. I care about what you're going through. I think it would be really helpful for you to talk to a professional who can give you the support you deserve. I'm always here for you, but I also need to protect my own well-being. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is survival. And at this stage of your life, you have earned every moment of quiet. Number 5, you don't owe them a relationship with someone who disrespects you. This is the hardest one. I know. I've sat with parents who cried through entire sessions over this. And I want to handle it with the care it deserves. Some of your adult children are not kind to you. Some of them call only when they need something. Some of them speak to you in ways they would never tolerate from a stranger. Some of them use guilt as a weapon, reminding you of every mistake you ever made, every moment they felt you fell short, every perceived failure of your parenting. And some of them have simply decided that you exist only to serve their needs. That your feelings, your dignity, your humanity, those don't matter. Only theirs do. If this describes your situation, I want to say something very carefully. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. You can love your child with every fiber of your being and still refuse to be mistreated. Those two things are not in conflict. In fact, the deepest form of self-respect is the willingness to say, "I love you too much to pretend this is okay." I have seen parents endure verbal abuse, financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and outright cruelty from their adult children year after year because they believed that enduring it was part of being a good parent. It is not. It never was. A relationship requires mutual respect. It requires two people who acknowledge each other's worth. If your adult child cannot treat you with basic dignity, then you have every right, and I would argue every responsibility, to create distance. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but out of self-preservation. The healthy boundary sounds like this. I love you. I will always love you. But I will not accept being spoken to this way. When you're ready to have a respectful relationship, I'll be here. That might be the bravest sentence you ever speak. And it might be the one that finally begins to heal what's been broken. Now I know what many of you are thinking. Because it's the same question I hear in my office every single week. If I set these boundaries, won't my children hate me? I want to give you the honest answer. Not the comfortable one. The honest one. In the short term, some of them might be angry. Some might pull away. Some might try even harder to guilt you into going back to the old pattern. That's normal. When you change the rules of a relationship that's been running a certain way for decades, the other person will resist. That's not a sign that you're wrong. That's a sign that the boundary is working. But here's what 40 years of experience have shown me. In the vast majority of cases, the vast majority, when a parent holds a boundary with consistency and calm, the adult child eventually adjusts. They might not like it, but they begin to respect it. And over time, the relationship actually improves. Because it's no longer built on resentment and obligation. It's built on honesty. And what about the cases where the child doesn't come back? Where they cut you off entirely because you dared to say no? That is a grief I would never minimize. It is one of the deepest pains a human being can experience. But I will tell you this. Even in that scenario, you are not wrong for choosing yourself. You are not wrong for refusing to live the rest of your life as someone else's emotional or financial hostage. You deserve peace. You deserve dignity. You deserve a life that belongs to you. Let me leave you with this. You spent 20, 30, maybe 40 years pouring everything you had into your children. You showed up. You provided. You sacrificed in ways they may never fully understand. And you did it out of love. But love is not a debt that compounds forever. There comes a point where the most loving thing you can do, for your children and for yourself, is to stop giving from an empty cup. You don't owe them your savings. You don't owe them your autonomy. You don't owe them your time on demand. You don't owe them your peace. And you don't owe them a relationship where you are treated as less than you are. What you owe yourself, after all these years, is permission. Permission to rest. Permission to enjoy. Permission to say no without guilt. Permission to live. You've earned it. Every single day of it. If this video spoke to something inside you, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, which of these 5 hit closest to home? And if there's a boundary you've been afraid to set, maybe today is the day you start. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Strong Elderly Life so you never miss a conversation like this. And remember, your life didn't end when your children grew up. In many ways, it's just beginning. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourself. You deserve it.